In the early hours of December 16, 1944, a surprise strike by over 200,000 German soldiers initiated a robust counter-offensive against the lightly defended Allied positions in the Ardennes Forest. The objective was to shift the balance of power in Europe. This intense conflict, known as the Battle of the Bulge, continued for a grueling month, characterized by some of the most intense and fierce confrontations of the war, before the German advance could be halted by the Allies. Yet the question remains, could the events have unfolded differently? During the latter part of 1944, the strategic and military standing of Nazi Germany had taken a severe downturn. The successful Allied landings in Normandy, coupled with the Soviet summer campaigns, had critically undermined their position. The liberation of several occupied regions further accentuated this decline, as it stripped German industry of crucial resources. In September 1944, the Reich Minister for Armaments and Munitions calculated that Germany had enough supplies to sustain one more year of conflict. Faced with this devastating scenario, a group of military officers attempted to assassinate Adolf Hitler on July 20, 1944, but he narrowly survived. Hitler concluded that reclaiming control domestically and gaining the upper hand militarily required a decisive and victorious counteroffensive on the Western Front. Meanwhile, the Western Allies faced challenges due to logistical constraints following their swift advancement through Western Europe. This led them to temporarily suspend operations to reorganize and restock. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets breached the German frontier for the first time in October, although the German forces managed to hold their ground. Now, preparations were underway for a Soviet winter offensive intending to penetrate German defenses in Poland. In Germany, radical interventions and maximum mobilization under the total war policy enabled the Nazi regime to muster their remaining reserves. Despite being a desperate effort, German industries produced a record number of tanks and artillery pieces in 1944, even under severe Allied bombardment. However, the German side faced formidable challenges. The morale and training of these new units were severely deficient. Veteran instructor Günter Koschorek confided in his diary on October 9th, reciting that the recruits were an eclectic mix, older ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe and naval personnel being retrained as infantry due to a scarcity of ships. Manpower deficits meant that new German army divisions had diminished combat prowess. In contrast to the average 13,000 soldiers found in a U.S. division, a typical German division had dwindled to about 9,000 men by late 1944. Their equipment was largely obsolete, and the artillery was an inconsistent mix of primarily captured Soviet weaponry. Despite being of inferior quality, these desperate reserves gave German commanders a brief respite to orchestrate Hitler's planned offensive. By September 1944, Hitler was resolute about launching an offensive, discussing it with his generals for the first time on the 16th. Ultimately, he chose an extensive solution, overriding the advice of many generals who preferred a smaller-scale campaign aimed towards Aachen and Liège. Hitler envisioned a significant operation through the Ardennes that would encompass cutting off Allied forces in Western Germany and the Netherlands while seizing the critical port city of Antwerp. The Ardennes was not only strategically chosen due to its sparse American troop presence, but also because it had been the site of a previous successful surprise German maneuver against the French in 1940. Phase 1 involved crossing the Meuse River, followed by a push north to capture Antwerp. Notably, the plan for Phase 2 remained indistinct with no concrete strategy for post-capture operations. Hitler harbored hopes that this move would shatter Allied morale, leading to a negotiated peace with Britain and America, allowing all German forces to be redirected eastward. However, skepticism pervaded among German military leaders. After the war, General Gerd von Rundstedt voiced, had they reached the Meuse, they ought to have thanked Providence on bended knee, let alone continued to Antwerp. The plan, crafted hastily, did not allow German Chief of Staff Alfred Jodl sufficient time to conduct an adequate evaluation of American forces present in the area, resulting in an underestimation of enemy capabilities. Many German units, with fuel for merely 30 to 40 kilometers, were optimistically expected to cover 200 kilometers to the Meuse in just a day. Thus, capturing Allied supply depots was crucial for the operation's viability. Weather played a pivotal role in German strategic calculations, with the success of the plan hinging on bad weather to prevent the Allies from leveraging their superior air force. 3 German armies were slated to launch the assault. Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army was the strongest, featuring all remaining SS Panzer divisions, 500 tanks, and over 1,000 artillery pieces tasked with crossing the Meuse and capturing Antwerp. Hasso von Manteuffel commanded the 5th Panzer Army, fielding 400 tanks, ordered to secure a perimeter around Brussels. Lastly, Erich Brandenberger led the weaker 7th Army, largely devoid of tanks and unmotorized, tasked with advancing into Luxembourg and southern Belgium to brace for an anticipated counteroffensive from George Patton's 3rd U.S. Army. The 7th Army's vulnerability posed a strategic flaw, rendering the left flank susceptible. Though aware of this, German commanders lacked reserves to mitigate the risk. The Wehrmacht gathered more than 200,000 soldiers into 29 divisions, with 9 being armored. Even internal Wehrmacht evaluations conceded that these units had low combat readiness. The opposing force comprised the U.S. 1st Army's V Corps under Leonard Jarrow and the U.S. 3rd Army's 8th Corps, led by Troy Middleton. The Allies faced their own dilemmas. The 1st Army aimed to strengthen its offensive against the Roer River dams, while the 3rd Army planned a strike toward the Saarland. This led to U.S. forces in the Ardennes being perilously stretched thin. An additional challenge was that the forces in the Ardennes included cavalry units, lighter, agile formations optimized for pursuing retreating adversaries, but less suitable for static defenses or skirmishes in dense forests. The U.S. Army had yet to adequately transition its strategic stance from rapid summer advances to the more entrenched position of autumn. Approximately 80,000 American troops were stationed in the Ardennes sector, and with 3 German armies poised to strike against 2 unprepared American corps, the situation intensified with weather forecasted to deteriorate, lending a prime opportunity for the German plan to unfold. The Germans discreetly maneuvered their forces into position throughout November and early December, moving only under the cover of darkness. Cooking fires were forbidden and no movement occurred during daylight. German reconnaissance planes flew at low levels during nights to oversee progress and mask the sounds of vehicle engines. Despite noticing hints of a German concentration, Allied reconnaissance either failed to communicate the signs timely or the warnings were dismissed, catching U.S. forces off guard. Even during this assembly phase, the Germans faced complications. Supply materials were often unloaded too far due to fears of detection. The emphasis on security over logistics led to significant supply shortages at the onset of the offensive. German forces had approximately 15,000 tons of artillery ammunition, although they required 1,200 tons daily, risking a shortage within 10 days. Motorization issues also surfaced. Emil Frey, a 17-year-old gunner in a rocket launcher battery, later reminisced how single trucks often dragged 3 launchers and sometimes even a command vehicle, all strung together resembling more of a circus procession than a formidable military force. Across the front line, American soldiers anticipated a reprieve. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel B. Strickler narrated how the Ardennes was considered a quiet sector, devoid of significant engagements after the Allies' first push to the German border in September. Yet, some soldiers noted peculiar events. A soldier mentioned, "Reconnaissance patrols continuously pestered us overnight. As darkness fell, gunfire erupted to cover the sounds of their tanks navigating into position." While some American troops sensed that something was amiss, anticipating a time of respite, others were oblivious to what lay ahead. As German units received orders on December 15th, Friedrich Menthe, a former 17-year-old naval soldier, recalled the bunker filling with anxious murmurs. Euphoria abruptly took hold among some, barely contained, as a hot meal was served, macabrely dubbed their final meal by some. Alcohol rations were shared to lift spirits, hand grenades, Panzerfausts, and extra ammunition distributed. Though instructed to rest fully dressed, few closed their eyes that night. By December 16th, as dawn broke, German artillery launched a ferocious bombardment, preparing to pave the way for their advancing tanks and infantry. In the midst of the turmoil, soldier Charlie Hogg had front-row seats to what can only be described as the most terrifying episode in his army service. Out of the forbidding darkness erupted the most blood-curdling screams and cries imaginable, an ominous signal that the Germans were advancing. In the northern sector, German forces immediately confronted complications. Despite deploying 4 panzer divisions, they failed to secure their initial goal of capturing Elsenborn Ridge. The dense forest limited their movement to a few narrow paths, leading to a massive traffic jam. In an attempt to force their way through, they prematurely deployed reserve units, exacerbating their issues. Meanwhile, in the central sector, the German forces experienced some initial triumph on that first day. The American troops were spread too thin, allowing von Manteuffel's panzers to penetrate almost universally. In contrast, the southern front saw varying outcomes. The 7th Army led an assault across the and Sauer rivers using small assault boats, suffering minimal casualties. However, the lack of adequate bridging equipment and precise American artillery fire left much of the 7th Army trapped on the eastern riverbanks. As the fighting subsided on the first day, a U.S. soldier captured the scene in a letter home. It was a wasteland strewn with sundered tree trunks, littered with remnants of intense close-quarter battles. Shattered rifles, broken bayonets, destroyed helmets, unexploded grenades, disassembled sandbags, and personal items like boots and gloves lying askew. By December 16th's end, Allied headquarters misjudged the scale of the attack, viewing it as a minor operation. The actual magnitude became undeniable the following day when the Germans launched 2 specialized operations. The first, known as Operation Stosser, aimed to secure key road junctions and bridges before the significant events unfolded. Yet, due to poor coordination with ground forces and insufficient preparation, only around 300 German paratroopers reached the target area. Lacking significant supply lines, they hid in the woods for 3 days, awaiting reinforcements that never came, eventually retreating back across the lines on December 20th. The second operation, dubbed Operation Greif, was led by Otto Skorzeny. His unit infiltrated in disguise using American uniforms, their mission to sow disorder by altering street signs and severing telephone connections. However, American forces swiftly apprehended most of Skorzeny's crew, executing them as saboteurs. Although German legal advisors assured Skorzeny that wearing enemy uniforms was permissible if no weapons were used, in practice, armies commonly executed enemies captured in their uniforms. The operation was officially terminated on the evening of December 17th, transitioning Skorzeny's men to function as a standard brigade. The German offensive, driven by desperation, delivered mixed military results. Where they achieved territorial gains, war crimes followed. The most notorious unit, Kampfgruppe Peiper, prompted by their leader Joachim Peiper's frustration over falling behind schedule, left a bloody trail. They executed 19 prisoners in Hansfeld, 59 in Billingen, 44 in Ligneville, and 58 in La Gleize. Finally, near Malmedy on December 17th, they brutally killed nearly 100 American captives, preferring murder over the burden of escorting prisoners. Fear paralyzed civilians as memories of harsh German occupation resurfaced. In eastern Belgium, where some had initially backed reunification with Nazi Germany in 1940, the reality of being second-class citizens under Nazi rule deepened anti-German sentiment. Nonetheless, pockets of pro-German support persisted into 1944, with reports of locals aiding the German forces. In Luxembourg, dissatisfaction over the German rule erupted after conscription and forced labor were imposed in 1942. By 1944, a substantial number of Luxembourgers had joined the resistance, leveraging their German language skills to funnel intelligence to American forces. Belgium's French-speaking populace had warmly embraced Allied forces upon liberation in September 1944. When the Germans returned in December, filled with vengeance, many Belgian families fled westward with the refugee tide. Amidst the upheaval, Allied command convened in a crisis meeting on December 20th, reassigning American forces north of the German breach to the command of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Although this move incensed U.S. 12th Army Group Commander Omar Bradley, he grudgingly complied. This strategic shift facilitated a swifter and more efficient deployment of reinforcements. Within a week, an impressive force of 250,000 American soldiers and some British 30 Corps units bolstered the defenses in the threatened sector. By December 23rd, the momentum of the German advance faltered as their logistic capabilities and motorized supply lines struggled to keep up. German propaganda attempted to cover for this shortfall by showcasing tanks disproportionately. In reality, in the Ardennes, their army relied far more on horse-drawn transport than on tanks. Circumstances further deteriorated for the Germans on December 23rd, when clear skies allowed Allied fighter bombers to launch devastating attacks on advancing German columns. This predicament forced the Germans into nocturnal movements, greatly restricting their mobility and tactical options. American artillery inflicted severe losses on the ill-equipped German infantry, compelling tanks into solo town assaults, a task for which they were ill-suited. The height of the German offensive came on Christmas Eve, December 24th, as their advancement ground to a stop. However, the Battle of the Bulge raged on. Back on December 20th, German forces had encircled the vital Belgian transport hub Bastogne, along with approximately 15,000 U.S. soldiers. American Private Joseph Sayek recounted the harrowing experience of being trapped with nowhere to turn as German forces closed in. Initially, the Germans hoped to seize the town swiftly through surprise, but stumbled when U.S. command sent the 101st Airborne Division in a display of tactical flexibility. Orders were issued on December 17th, and within 48 hours, over 3,000 trucks ferried 12,000 American troops and essential supplies to Bastogne. Initial German probes into the town faltered. Faced with the challenge, they divided their forces, with 2 panzer divisions pressing west, while the 26th Volksgrenadier Division remained besieging the town. In retrospect, Division Commander Fritz Bayerlein regretted this decision, acknowledging it as a significant blunder, arguing that a concentrated assault would likely have succeeded, given the shortage of German artillery to dismantle the American defense. Attempting a ruse, on December 22nd, the Germans demanded the surrender of the encircled U.S. forces. In response, American Commander Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with a single defiant word: nuts. On the day McAuliffe delivered his iconic retort, Patton's Third Army began its northward advance towards the beleaguered Bastogne, though precisely when they would reach assistance remained uncertain. The first hint of relief appeared on December 23rd, when a fleet of 240 Douglas C-47 transports dropped over 230 tons of provisions into the town, bolstering the defenders. Despite this, the Germans launched increasingly frantic, albeit fruitless offensives to take Bastogne, even as Patton's forces inched inexorably closer. On December 27th, his army shattered the decimated, starving 5th Parachute Division, breaking through German lines with all guns blazing and linking up with the besieged paratroopers. Although the Germans attempted counterattacks against the narrow relief corridor, they could not halt the U.S. Third Army's progress. The operation culminated with a rendezvous of Patton's troops with U.S. First Army forces near Houffalize on January 16th, effectively ending the fight for Bastogne. In total, the battle for this small town, population 4,000, resulted in the deaths of some 20,000 American soldiers, including 4,500 from the 101st Airborne, along with 25,000 Germans. Yet, the Battle of the Bulge was far broader than Bastogne's dramatic siege. With the strategic initiative reclaimed, American forces launched offensives to recover lost territory, harnessing overwhelming firepower. Artillery and fighter bombers decimated German-controlled villages before coordinated forces eradicated any remaining resistance. Consistent bombardment shattered German morale, leading to desperate tactics, including forcing civilians or prisoners to fortify defenses. Amid ongoing clashes on January 1, 1945, in a turn of unfortunate events, Allied forces committed a grave atrocity following their forceful takeover of the heavily secured settlement of Chinoin. Sergeant John Faig recounts the grim reality, noting that his comrades were aligning captured German soldiers in fields flanking the thoroughfare. Groups of approximately 25 to 30 young Germans stood there, facing brutal execution by machine gun fire, a war crime mirroring those we condemned the Japanese and Germans for. Overcome with dismay, I averted my eyes from the grim scene and proceeded up the slope. In the meantime, the Germans initiated another tactical maneuver, codenamed Operation Bodenplatte. This mission, carried out by the Luftwaffe, involved launching all operational fighter aircraft from the Western Front simultaneously to surprise and devastate Allied airfields, wrecking enemy planes on the ground. At daybreak, around 1,000 German aircraft took to the skies, the aviators thrilled by the sheer scale of this endeavor. I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer number of aircraft dotting the horizon. Civilians stood immobilized in astonishment, and soldiers gazed in awe as we flew past the front line at a low altitude. However, the Luftwaffe's chief, Hermann Göring, delivered ruthless orders that quickly dampened the pilots' spirits. Any returning without adequately attacking an enemy airfield would be forced to make another sortie. This directive spelled disaster, because attacking again meant relinquishing the element of surprise. Moreover, poor coordination with ground forces led to several instances of friendly fire. Compounded by extensive fuel shortages due to long approach distances, the operation's effectiveness was seriously compromised. All told, Germany lost over 300 aircraft compared to the Allies' losses of 260 planes. However, the Allies could rapidly replace their losses, a luxury unavailable to the Germans. Hostilities persisted into the early days of January, with the Allies gradually advancing against the stiff German opposition. On January 10th, German High Command acknowledged defeat, withdrawing 3 panzer divisions from the front to reinforce efforts in Hungary, as the Red Army commenced its winter offensive along the Vistula River on January 12th. Consequently, the Wehrmacht's presence in the Ardennes was further weakened, with reserves being urgently redirected to shield Berlin from Soviet advances, stabilizing just 70 kilometers from the capital due to outrunning their supply lines. The German units left in the Bulge resorted to mere rearguard actions, and on January 28th, the U.S. Army officially declared the Battle of the Bulge concluded. The Ardennes campaign inflicted severe casualties on both sides. Americans suffered the loss of approximately 8,600 lives, as well as incurring 21,000 missing and about 47,000 wounded, alongside 20,000 cases of non-battle afflictions such as frostbite. Meanwhile, the Germans recorded around 15,500 fatalities, with 27,500 captured or missing, and approximately 42,000 wounded. The conflict also claimed the lives of more than 2,500 Belgian civilians and 500 Luxembourgers, with some falling victim to marauding German troops or their security forces, whereas nearly 1,000 perished due to Allied aerial bombardments on German-occupied locales. The region's towns and villages lay in ruins, with years required to restore infrastructure, reclaim the bodies of fallen soldiers, and clear unexploded ordnance. The exhaustive combat concluded in a decisive defeat for Germany, yet one might question whether the German strategic plan ever stood a chance of prevailing. The German offensive was marred by crippling deficiencies, insufficient supplies deposited far from the front lines, and crucial units being briefed on the attack's details only the night prior, leaving no room for thorough reconnaissance or tactical assessment. These factors illustrate the German leadership's paranoia, which placed clandestineness above thorough preparation. Another critical error was tasking the most elite German units to attack under Dietrich's SS Panzer Army in the north, where the strongest Allied resistance was anticipated, contrary to conventional military wisdom that advises directing superior forces against the enemy's weaker points to secure breakthroughs. The assignment was influenced by political reckoning, as Hitler, distrustful of the regular army after an assassination attempt, entrusted more to the Waffen-SS. However, the Waffen-SS faltered in executing efficient strategies encumbered by ideological biases that led to poor tactical usage. Even if Waffen-SS operations had been executed more astutely, the success hinged on uncontrollable factors such as inclement weather and seizing enemy fuel supplies. How the Germans expected to outpace the far better motorized Americans to these fuel depots remains a mystery. By late 1944, the German military was predominantly composed of hastily mustered manpower with antiquated arms, lacking logistical support to sustain any prolonged conflict, as German war production was dwindling, unable to replenish military losses. The Allies' undisputed air dominance, once skies cleared, blocked German supply lines, disrupted logistical hubs, and provided crucial air support to ground forces. Politically, Hitler's objectives flailed, given the Western Allies' refusal to strike a separate peace deal, having already negotiated with the Soviets for post-war Germany. Under these circumstances, the German attack was destined for failure. The Battle of the Bulge symbolized a total defeat for Germany in tactical, strategic, and political arenas. The Nazis grossly underestimated American resolve and overestimated their own declining capability. The futile expenditure of Germany's remaining reserves prolonged the war slightly, accelerating the Soviet push toward Berlin. Following the Battle of the Bulge, the Western Allies recuperated and advanced into Germany's industrial core in early 1945. During the Western Front's final major confrontation in World War II, the Rhineland Campaign, an Allied force composed of British and American units, fought fiercely to breach the German frontier, progressing toward the formidable Rhine River. Crossing this formidable natural barrier involved orchestrating an expansive amphibious assault, combined with the largest single-day airborne operation of the entire war. To delve deeper into this often overlooked campaign, explore Rhineland 45, our extensive documentary series, spanning 5 parts and 3.5 hours, filmed on original battlefields, implementing detailed maps and animations. Featuring expert insights from Christoph Bergs, David Willey of the Tank Museum, and interviews with veterans, Rhineland 45 is the most expansive chronicle of the Rhineland campaign. This series is not available on YouTube due to demonetization risks, but instead streams on Nebula, a platform developed with other creators to bypass YouTube's content limitations. Watch it by visiting nebula.tv/realtimehistory and enjoy a 40% savings at $3 monthly or $30 annually, accessing our videos and those by other insightful creators like Mustard or Real Engineering, all ad-free and early, while supporting us directly. That's Nebula.